Dear colleagues, we continue our working day, and I give the floor to the first deputy of Chief Monitor of OSCE Special Monitoring Mission in Ukraine, Alexander Hug, and I remind you that the briefing is going to be in English, so you can get equipment for simultaneous translation. Mr. Hug, the floor is yours.
Dear friends, thank you for coming here today. As you know, tomorrow marks the one-year anniversary of the signing of the Minsk package of measures, which had been signed there on the 12th of February. Since the signing, the OSCE Special Monitoring Mission to Ukraine has issued more than 300 reports, mostly dealing with the conflict in Donbass. Those reports speak for themselves. They reflect the SMM, the day in, day out work of its monitors on the ground. The numbers of monitors have increased by 2/3 since the last signature under the Minsk package 12 months ago. The reports reflect their growing geographical footprint with ever-increasing numbers of hubs and forward patrol bases. The reports reflect the skilled use of technology and has allowed the monitors to monitor and report on violence, its victims, and efforts to overcome and put a halt to it. These reports also reflect the events and occurrences that have shaped this conflict. I glanced at the few random reports from 11th and 12th February last year, and they all tell a story of a troubled Donbass and sometimes of other parts of Ukraine. In Kramatorsk, for instance, this time last year, my colleagues were able to confirm that the two parts of the southeastern outskirts of the town had been shelled, probably by a Smerch or Tornado multiple rocket launcher, and heard firing of 4 outgoing surface-to-air missiles that happened at the 11th of February 2015. In Donetsk, a year ago, colleagues of mine were following up on the shelling of a hospital in which 1 civilian had been killed and 4 injured. That happened on the 12th of February, a year ago. In Luhansk, my colleagues were patrolling in a number of areas affected by shelling, apparently by rockets from a Smerch multiple rocket launcher. That happened on 12th of February last year. Near Kapitanove, southeast of Severodonetsk, a year ago, the SMM heard nearly 30 outgoing Grad rounds on the 12th of February 2015. Now, 1 year on, what has changed? Yesterday, my colleagues were in Marinka, southwest of Donetsk. Earlier, at 8 o'clock in the morning, several civilians lost their lives there when a minivan hit an anti-tank mine. Throughout the whole week, my colleagues have seen hundreds of people queuing at that very checkpoint and at the other crossings points along the contact line. At Stanitsa Luhanska Bridge, we have been recording up to 2,000 people crossing daily. These people face hours of delays. The delays are so long people are trying to circumvent these checkpoints. It seems the driver of the minivan that hit the mine yesterday in Marinka was trying to do this. He was driving in a field parallel to the road, apparently trying to jump the long queue. The queues are getting longer. Security checks had been the norm. However, now, people even face what armed men described as customs or immigration controls. All of this they face just so they can collect their pensions, do shopping, or meet their friends or family within their own country. The tragic loss of life in Marinka underlines the danger involved in doing such normal, everyday things. The Security Working Group within the Trilateral Contact Group has identified 12 priority areas for demining. This is very limited though. Only the bare minimum surface area is to be demined. This is enough only to allow repair crews to fix specific civilian infrastructure. In any case, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of other areas similarly infested with mines and unexploded ordnance. This Tuesday, for instance, we saw an Eurogun unexploded ordnance 2 kilometers north of the Baltseve. Dear friends, of all those who died from mines and unexploded ordnance in the past 12 months, I am reminded in particular of 2 old people killed around Luhansk. It was around Christmas, and they had taken an unapproved route across the contact line. I can only guess why they did it. Perhaps difficulty and delay in getting the crossing permit? Perhaps the long delays at the Stanica Luhanska bridge in freezing cold temperatures? Perhaps they did not trust armed men. We have, for instance, recently reported on 3 other pensioners viciously attacked near Pervomaisk. One of them was actually shot dead. Whatever the reasons the 2 people in Luhansk had for crossing, they never made it to the government-controlled side of the contact line. They both died when they activated an explosive device. This week, we have seen an increasing numbers of people crossing. They are doing so because they fear that the crossing points will be closed. The Mayor's crossing point remains closed because of fighting around Horlivka, in particular in Zaitsev. If I compare the period before the signing of the Minsk package with the period after, one thing stands out: the massive decrease in the use of heavy artillery. But in the eastern outskirts of Horlivka last week, the SMM recorded approximately 100 artillery explosions in just one day. Yesterday, We even recorded the use of multiple launch rocket systems in Staruch-Nachtivka. Just last night, I received imagery obtained from one of our unmanned aerial vehicles. It indicated the presence of a multiple launch rocket system hidden under trees in so-called LPR-controlled Vesla Chorivka in the Luhansk region. And a picture here showing these possible multiple launch rocket system, a BM-21 Grad system, is being displayed. It is blown up, but our analysts have clearly identified the type of weapon. Dear friends, one artillery explosion or one MLRS, all violations of Minsk is one too many. Behind such statistics, there are real people, people whose homes and lives are destroyed. This week, our monitors had the humbling task to follow up on some of these disturbing cases. Over the weekend, they spoke to a 60-year-old man in hospital. He had suffered shrapnel injuries to his face, right leg and shoulder, and both arms, including the loss of 2 fingers on his right hand. This happened to him as he sat at his home in Marinka at 7 o'clock in the evening on 4th of February, when at least 10 shells landed in his neighborhood. One of them impacted just 2 meters from him, showering him with multiple fragments of shrapnel. For this man, it doesn't really matter what kind of weapon was fired at his home. They all kill and maim. Our monitors did, however, note the weapon type on 5th of February when they heard 57 82mm mortar explosions 6 to 10 kilometers northeast of Marinka. As you know, the use of such weapons is prohibited by the addendum to the Minsk package, which the sides signed up to at the end of September last year. The owner of a house in Komiternovo was somewhat luckier than the Marinka resident. He escaped without injury. The roof of his house, however, was destroyed by a shell. Many homes in such places are already without electricity, water, or gas. Without a roof, one wonders how they can survive this winter. Dear friends, I come back to my question. What has changed since the signing of the Minsk package of measures? I am inclined to think the people in Donbass are best qualified to answer this. I am in fact going there very soon. Among other things, I hope to hear from them directly, to find out what their views of the past year are, and to take stock of all what happened in the meantime. I am already tough in a position to give an assessment regarding the SMM's freedom of movement. This is, of course, guaranteed under the Minsk package, not to mention in the SMM mandate, as provided by 57 participating states. Restrictions on our freedom of movement generally correlates with the use or movement of proscribed weapons or other activities inconsistent with commitment or adherence to the Minsk Agreement. Although I will wait for the verdict from people on the ground, the fact that the SMM continues to face restrictions, in some places systematic in nature, is quite disturbing. This week, for instance, armed so-called DPR members have effectively locked us out of areas east of the line running from Primorske to Kominternove. And yesterday, someone fired shots at one of our unmanned aerial vehicles in an area not controlled by the government, approximately 3 kilometers north of Veselo Horivka. And in case you're wondering, it is indeed the same Veselo Horivka where we have seen earlier on this multi-launch rocket system that I have shown you here. As I have said here many times before, someone does not want us to see what is going on and what is happening. In trying to prevent us from seeing, they do, however, help us, all of us, to see something different, namely the true extent of their commitment to what has been agreed in Minsk. I know the question I ask remains unanswered, but it is fair to say that the sides need to rethink their positions. At the very last, there is mistrust, inevitable miscalculation, and sometimes, as we have seen recently around Horivka and increasingly so around Marinka, escalation. Much remains to be done to fulfill the promise of the Minsk Agreement so that a degree of normality can be restored to the people's lives, particularly in the conflict zone. I therefore appeal to the sides to redouble their efforts to make this a reality. As usual, at the end of my statement, I would like to inform you about the latest mission numbers. As of today, the mission counts 684 monitors, of which 564 are deployed to the east. In addition, there are 292 national staff and 77 other international staff working for the OSCE Special Monitoring Mission to Ukraine. Thank you for your attention.
Дякую, пане Хук. Колеги, чи є питання або уточнення?
Dear colleagues, do you have...
Mr. Hook, we have a question from German TV, RTE, ARTE from Roman Schau, and he's wondering on the role of GCC in the context of growing tensions in the GCC, in the light of scandals revealed by Russian cooperation, Russian center employees cooperating with illegal formations in the eastern Ukraine. What is the position of OSCE on the importance of in the days of growing violence in eastern Ukraine?
Thank you for your question. The joint coordination commissions are one of the range of stabilization measures crisis situations of this kind require. They help all involved to deal with military and other technical issues arising from the implementation of agreed measures. The Joint Center for Control and Coordination, the JCCC, is a bilateral initiative between Ukraine and Russia. The OSCE SMM has supported the JCCC since its establishment in September 2014. At the end of September 2015, members of the Trilateral Contact Group, as well as Mr. Plotnitsky and Mr. Sakarchenko, entrusted several specific tasks to the Joint Center for Control and Coordination. This include helping to ensure complete ceasefire along the line of contact and rapid response to possible cases of impediments to monitoring and verification. The success of the Joint Center has been mixed, and we are in particular concerned about their inability to deal effectively with impediments to monitoring and verification. Parts of the Joint Center's difficulties stem from its lack of a clear mandate, role, and responsibilities. In order to implement the task assigned to it in Minsk better, it needs to get better of making joint decisions and at talking joint action and taking joint action to implement those. The SMM will continue to support these efforts and to make this center truly joint, including, if required, through providing access to the valuable experience of joint military commissions in other countries. Finally, the SMM is aware of allegations made against the Russian contingent that recently left Ukraine, but is not in a position to verify these. Related inquiries should be directed to the security services of Ukraine. Thank you.
Дякую вам. Чи є ще питання або уточнення? Якщо... Так, є питання. Next question will be in Ukrainian.
Добрий день, перший діловий, Ратушна Ірина. Скажіть, будь ласка, зірвали маршрутку під Мар'їнкою, так? І взагалі є погрози з боку Росії, то в такому плані, що починається війна. Взагалі, які дії, вірніше, що Росія до нас матиме воєнні, буде проводити воєнні дії до нашого боку і готується до того. Які взагалі, чи вбачаєте ви загрозу в тому, що...
The real threat because of this minibus explosion, and what will be the measures?
Thank you. Our observation suggests the following. In front of this Ukrainian checkpoint in Marinka, there had been a long column of vehicles waiting to cross from non-controlled areas into areas controlled by the government. The driver of this vehicle did not queue, but overtook the queue. By doing so, he drove off the hard surface of the asphalt of the road. And on the sides of the road, most likely, there had been anti-tank mines, of which one he hit, which resulted in the explosion and consequently in the death of several civilians. the areas around checkpoints, all along the contact line, is infested, polluted with mines and unexploded ordnance. Both sides mount mines to defend their checkpoints. We have long argued that the sides should fence off these risky areas. And I would like to use the opportunity to remind everyone that driving off hard surface, the asphalt on roads, especially near checkpoints, is very dangerous, as these are unapproved areas and might be infested, polluted with mines. Thank you.
Дякую вам. Чи є ще питання? Аж цілих два.
My name is Darina Mar from the BBC. We have a question. Do you think that humanitarian situation is much worse in some areas along the line? Because as we know, some non-humanitarian NGOs have been banned in Donetsk, for example, responsible citizens, and one member of the still in the MGB in DPR.
In fact, we have noted an increase in humanitarian concerns in the security zone. It is most evident on areas not controlled by the government. The closure of crossing points along the contact line adds to these concerns. Not only are individuals forced to take now routes that are not approved and risk of being harmed by mines, services cannot be delivered any longer because the crossings are closed. We also see, in fact, a shortage of specialized services and goods in areas not controlled by the government, and follow very closely the crackdown on those civil activists in Donetsk itself, and call upon all sides to respect what they have agreed in Minsk, which is to allow access, unhindered access of humanitarian aid to those most in need. Thank you.
Алена Радевич, телеканал ОНТ. У меня уточнение. В каком-то смысле, в каким-то образом СММ ОБСЕ занимается вопросами освобождения пленных, и в каком состоянии там сейчас находятся вот украинские пленные на неподконтрольной территории? Спасибо.
Thank you. The release of detainees and prisoners is part of the Minsk agreement. The International Red Cross is a lead agency in this regard. The OSCE Special Monitoring Mission has monitored some of the exchanges and has documented these findings in its reporting, and will continue to do so when that becomes necessary. And of course reminds that the sides have to fulfill all measures of the Minsk package, including that relates to the release of all detained and held at this very moment.
Дякую вам. Чи є ще питання або уточнення, колеги? Якщо немає, thank you, Mr. Hook. Looking forward to having you here next week.
Thank you.
Колеги, це був останній брифінг на сьогодні. Розклад прес-конференції на завтра.